Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode number 4 of the CameraShakePodcast with Nick Kirby and me, Kersten Lutz. The photo and video podcast coming at you straight out of isolation into your eardrums. We'll be talking about talk life in lockdown, what's happening in the world outside, and if we're lucky, we'll hit on photography too. And it would really help us out if you could subscribe to the video version of this podcast on YouTube. You'll find the link in the show description. So without further ado, how's it going, Nick?
Going all right, thanks. Hey, how are you?
Not bad. How you're holding up in this lockdown situation?
Doing all right. Weather's been actually really nice this week, so I've tried to get out in the garden a little bit more. I'm starting to struggle with my hair. It is now impossible to deal with, so I kind of just give up. But other than that, it's been a pretty busy week. Lots of editing going on. I've made some, hopefully significant pre-production progress, on our next photo challenge, which is actually a video this time. So that'll be coming up in next week's episode.
Yeah.
Other than that, it's been quite a relaxed week, I have to say. How about you? What have you been up to?
Well, I've taken care of my hair situation. Obviously, today I decided it's a hat day today. So, although having said that, of course, I haven't seen the inside of her hairdressers for 25 years.
No.
So, those are the benefits of long hair.
I assume you've got very long hair then.
Well, I mean, I do get it cut like twice a year, but it's, it's sort of a do-it-yourself kind of a job. Not that I cut it myself, but, there are family members who are, stepping up to the plate.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just thinking, how much money have I saved in 25 years? How much is it? How much is a haircut these days?
That's worth working out.
Yeah, I mean, how much do you pay for a haircut?
You don't want to know. You really don't want to know.
But I am correct in thinking that haircuts for men are considerably less expensive than haircuts for ladies, right?
Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, I pay in the region of about £30 every time I go.
Okay, so how often per year do you go?
About every 6 weeks.
Every 6 weeks,
yeah.
£30. Okay, so that's £5 per week, really.
Yeah.
Okay, that's probably paid for a good bit of camera kit for me then. That's the way I equate that.
Maybe that's what I do. I'm just not going to cut my hair again, so I can just buy another camera, couple of lenses.
If you're thinking about switching camera systems, that's the way to go.
Definitely.
So other than not going to the hairdressers, it's been a fairly busy week. I actually did a photography contract last week, which was interesting. In these times of lockdown and everything, but it was a commercial shoot on a construction site. And it's a very, very large site, and there was literally nobody else there. So it was all very, very safe. But that was,
how did that go? What type of shot? Were these internal shots or external ones that you needed to do?
Well, they're a bit of both. They're large sort of distribution centers, so they're, very, very large buildings. And so it's a combination of interior shots and exterior shots, basically. The big blue boxes. So it's always it's an interesting challenge to make them look good. It's actually fun. It's just fun to get out of the house, and to do something different for a change. So that was really, very welcome.
Yeah.
And it was like a whole day kind of shoot. So
I'm quite jealous that you have been able to get out and do something fun and enjoyable, even though it's work, right? But it's fun and enjoyable. And, I've been trying to work out now what I could do next week as a kind of a mini project where I can go outside and do it on my own. So I'm going to have some thoughts over that over the next couple of days.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting because for some reason, it feels like we're coming to the final part of the lockdown now. Things are starting to kind of go back in other countries, maybe more than over here in the UK at the moment. But I think it feels to me like it's busier outside. I don't know about you, but it just feels like there's more going on.
I think
when we go for our daily
true.
exercise, or on a trip to the supermarket or something, it just feels like there's more traffic. Maybe I don't know. Just
I think you're right. It definitely is busier out there, and not wanting to get political in any way, but perhaps our government is not moving at quite the right pace that it should be. But economy's got to get going. Let's hope that it works out in the right way.
Yeah, it's really, I think it's impossible to say what the right thing to do is at the moment. I'm sort of looking at other countries like Germany, for example. And again, this isn't political in any way, shape, or form. It's just that I have family in Germany, and of course they're moving. They're ahead of us a little bit. A good, I don't know, a few weeks or a month or something. And a lot of things are going back to more or less normal, or the new normal, if you want. Yeah. But certainly, a lot more freedoms have opened up there. And it's interesting when you speak to people, like when I speak to my relatives. Some people are all for it. Others don't think it's a good idea. It's I find it impossible to judge what the right thing to do is at the moment. Yeah. So, it's so I take I cherish every opportunity that I get to get out of the house and to do things differently. But I'm also very safety conscious still.
Yeah. I mean, as you know, I play in a obviously I play bass as well, and I play in a function band normally at the weekends, and that's been on stop for weeks and weeks and weeks now. We were actually having a chat last night, funnily enough, just to decide or try and work out when we think we're going to be able to resume playing. And I think the upshot is it could easily be September, October before we can get out gigging again. And that's a depressing thought. That really is.
It really is. It is depressing. Yeah, it's and it's not great for kids either. My kids are, I think they're sick to death of having to be confined to the house.
Yeah.
But better safe than sorry, as I say.
Yep.
So anyway. So having said that, there have been a number of really interesting developments in the world of photography this week or this last week. So what sort of stuff have you come across, Nick?
A couple of days ago, this photo caught my eye. There's a photographer called Arjun, I hope I say this correctly, Arjun Menon. And he as he said, he was listening to a song, and for some reason, the Joker from Batman popped into his head, and him falling out of a window, like a skyscraper type window, with no look of despair on his face, just still looking how you'd expect the Joker to look. Yeah. So he decided to go about trying to create that photo at home. And if you're thinking, if that thought pops into your head, you may think, well, how are you going to be able to do something like that? It's the Joker. So what he ended up doing was he got an action figure that he owned of the Joker and a load of household items and created this fake scene. So he set his camera up, above and pointing down, and he's got the Joker figure in kind of a falling type position, just attached by, a stick, which he edit out later, and then started positioning different household items around him to look like a skyscraper around him. So he's taken like a long cover from his air conditioning unit, and because that's got holes in, he's then put that vertically to make it look like the side of a skyscraper. And because of those holes, he's able to put little LED tea lights that side to shine through to give the appearance of lights on in the skyscraper. And then he's got other items like the filters from his AC, Bluetooth speakers, keyboards, ice trays, anything like an old computer as well, tower, taking the side off, and positioned all these things around, and then started doing a bit more lighting. And he put snow everywhere as well. And the way he recreated the snow was quite interesting. He used, what did he use? He used shaving foam mixed with corn flour. And so that was kind of the heavy snow on the ground. And then the snow that he put in the air was hairspray shot with a flash.
Nice.
Which is crazy. And you start looking at some of this, he's got a keyboard on its side. So if you position that and shoot that in just the right angle, that could easily look like another skyscraper to the side, particularly if you put this snow covering on it as well. And I tell you what he's produced is fantastic. He's got some kind of shots from the outside too, so you can see what it looks like. But the final image, he's done, what a great job. It could come straight out of a comic book. It looks really
fantastic.
Cool.
I love that about product photography very often, especially with when you see sort of beverages like, beer bottles or wine bottles, or, bottles and glasses and stuff. It's very interesting how these like pearls of water are being, recreated to look like the real thing when they're really not, because of course, when you're doing a product shoot, it takes a long time. You need things to be not moving, essentially. So, what ends up looking like some pearls of water running down the side of a beer bottle, or, the kind of frosting on the bottle or something, that's not really frosting. It's all fake, clearly, but it looks so real. And I think in food photography, for example, you see that a lot. Is it this thing? If you've ever been to McDonald's and you looked at you look at the menu cards and you kind of think, that Big Mac never looks like that when I open my box. It never looks like that.
I feel like I'm in Falling Down right now.
Yeah, exactly. But so I find that really, really interesting. To kind of see how all of that's done.
Yeah, it really is. And this, Menon's photo there, it just goes to show just a little bit of creative thinking and, a little bit of time and a bit of careful consideration. You can create pretty much whatever you want to create at home. Just need to think about it in a slightly different way. That's cool, man.
The point, I think that, the point being, you can recreate it at home, because especially now when, if you're into photography and you're sitting at home and you're thinking, I can't go anywhere. What am I going to shoot? Maybe if you're into shooting wildlife, and of course that's difficult in a way, because it's difficult to get anywhere. Then these are really interesting things that you could practice at home. Because everybody's got a bottle in the fridge or something. So this, I always find there's a great number of really useful kind of tutorial type videos on YouTube, for example. That can teach you a lot. And maybe now is the time to learn new things.
Absolutely. So I'll find a link to this photo and I'll get that posted on our Facebook page. And we'll also put it in the show notes for the podcast below as well.
Okay, so here's the thing I came across, in fact, only yesterday, that really made me think. Now, Washington State has brought out guidelines for photographers who want to reopen their studios at the end of lockdown. So they've come up with a whole set of guidelines, and it's very interesting to read through those. So I'll talk about those in a second. But it just made me think of what's going to happen when we go back to life as we sort of knew it, and how that might change the way that we work in photography in general. So the whole point, obviously, is to make your studio safe. And one of the things that you won't be able to do in the sort of, immediate future is to photograph any groups, and that kind of makes sense. So it's really just photo shoots with individuals only. There can't be any unnecessary paper products. So decor and promotional marketing materials need to be removed. All equipment like props, chairs, benches, or anything a client might come into contact with must be sanitized frequently. Photo shoots can only happen on appointment. So there's going to be enough time in between appointments, obviously, to sanitize all equipment. Outdoor sessions are recommended and should be used whenever possible. And of course, photographers must maintain social distancing using a no-touch posing technique kind of strategy. I mean, the no touching whilst posing somebody is sort of a thing that I think that's an unspoken rule. Maybe sometimes it's a spoken rule, but it's, generally you wouldn't want to touch models anyway. And of course, you can only photograph one client in the studio at any one time. The only exception to that is if your model is, or if your client is a minor, then or underage, then obviously one parent can be present. Do you find that very restrictive generally, or do you think that's a feasible way of sort of getting things back up and started?
Well, it is restrictive, but I'm more pleased that they're trying to get something going, and rather than, what's the alternative? That they continue to be completely shut down, right?
Yeah.
So, if you are a portrait photographer, then great. Hopefully you can start getting a little bit of business back. Whether the clients are going to be there or not and still want to have portraits done during this time, that's another question, I guess. But at least they're trying to get things moving, and by the sounds of it, in the safest possible way. Over time, in a few weeks, it might open up a little bit more. A few weeks again, open up a little bit more, and then perhaps by the end of the year, maybe the start of next year, they'll be able to do what they would normally have done.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that it's a very sensible policy, really, to get things back up and running, because I do think that obviously we'll have to get back to back to business at some point. And although in a sense, on one hand, it is a whole lot of hassle having to sanitize all your gear all the time and not being able to do groups. But really, this seems like a pretty balanced alternative, I think. So, when I read that, I kind of thought, well, this all makes sense. As you say, it makes sense for, it's good news for portrait photographers, for example. I'm worried still about event photography. And that side of the business, because large group gatherings, that's really not going to happen anytime soon, I don't think. So, shooting conferences, I shoot quite a few conferences throughout the year. I think that's all. All these plans have been put on ice for the foreseeable future. So
during last week's interview with Dan Ackerley, even he mentioned him being a wedding photographer, and prior to that, concert photography. He's saying that his business was one of the first to kind of go down, if you like, to get shut down, because it's all event based, and it's also going to be the last to reopen. I feel in the same position with my function band work. It's first thing to go, last thing to come back. So it's very, 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 very difficult if you are an event photographer.
Yeah. It's a chance, I think it's an opportunity to do other things. That's how I've always looked at it, as you know. Yeah. It's also an opportunity to get all your gear back in order, clean all your lenses, so when things go back, then, you're ready. And that's, I think that's the way to take it. It may be an opportunity to change your business around a little bit. Maybe if you haven't, if you haven't done a lot of portrait photography before, maybe now's the time to start looking into that. I feel that if, as businesses go back, possibly headshots are going to be one of the first things in this sort of corporate photography world that will possibly sort of bounce back a little bit. Everybody's got a new hairstyle now, so this might be the opportune moment to get some new headshots done. And maybe, it's just an opportunity when things go back to freshen up your LinkedIn profile, So I think that may be sort of the first, those may be like the first strands to come back. And then, the rest will follow, no doubt. I've got no doubt that things will pick up again. But yeah, so that just caught my eye, because I thought, for once, that seemed a very reasonable, well-balanced set of guidelines, for photographers to come back. So, I'm wondering whether, our government will recommend something similar, or whether it's going to be down to each person individually. But if you're a working photographer and you're wondering how things could turn out when we're going back, I think that's well worth reading, because that could give you some really good ideas as to how to start working safely over the next few months.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that caught my eye this week. How about you, Nick? Did you find anything else of interest?
I did. This is a bit techie that I came across, and so you may have seen over the last year or so that Samsung released a couple of sensor chips, which were I've written these down to make sure I remember them, which was 64 megapixels and 108 megapixel sensor for phones. Which is just insane, obviously.
Say that again. How many megapixels?
They did one that was 108 megapixels. I don't know if that ended up in a phone yet or not. Not sure. But they're just unveiled one that's 50 megapixels, which seems slightly more reasonable. But what's different about this is that it's going to be able to do dual pixel autofocus.
Nikon.
Which is very cool. And it's got different low light performance as well. What's really interesting about this is that under normal circumstances, good light, it will use the full 50 megapixel sensor. But what it's now able to do is when it's in low light performance, rather than using 50 megapixels, it'll end up producing a 12.5 megapixel picture. But how it's doing that is combining 4 pixels into one. So ultimately, it's able to take in more light. But so to be able to do both of those things is just spectacular. When it will go into a phone, I don't know, but you're kind of getting to the point now where do you need a DSLR? Shoot great video and take great pictures? Maybe, maybe not. We will see when this gets into a phone. I think ultimately it's just going to be, they're just different. They do things slightly differently. The DSLR is always going to have its own edge, given the other flexibility that it's got. But if you want to shoot video and photo on your phone now, and that kind of a sensor is in it, you're going to come out with some stunning footage.
Well, I think that's the thing. It's the thing about low light performance. It's not really the sensor size, because larger sensors will allow you to have a bigger opening in the lens and get more light in. And that's just physics, essentially. The megapixel count is an interesting one, because any low light photographer will tell you that if you use a camera with a very high megapixel count, like 60 megapixels or something, the low light performance on that will usually not be that great compared to, like, let's say a 24 megapixel camera. And that's interesting to me, is that that sensor will automatically kind of ramp down to 12 megapixel in a low light scenario. So that's sort of an interesting way of looking at things, I think. So I think the question as to whether smartphones can make DSLRs or mirrorless cameras redundant, that's been around for a few years, really. And I think it's not a matter of one replacing the other. It's, as you say, it's a thing of, like, different horses for different courses. There are situations where smartphones work really, really well. Like, for instance, just think, like, if you're out and about, and you're out with the family, or you're on holiday or something, you always have your phone with you. If you see something that's really interesting you want to take a photo of, then you have your phone on you. And one of the biggest drawbacks of, like, a big camera, whether that's a DSLR or whether it's a mirrorless or whether it's a pro camera or whatever type of camera it is the fact that it's big and it's chunky, and you got to carry it with you. And what if you're just on the way to the supermarket and you see something that's interesting, but you got your phone with you? Well, you've got a really decent camera in that. And the video performance, I think, generally in smartphones has come on such a long way. Even there's a thing I read not too long ago. Do you remember the director Steven Soderbergh?
Oh yeah.
He shot a whole movie on iPhone. So the video quality of our smartphones these days is really great.
Was it? I want to say it was Bentley who shot an advert all on the iPhone as well. And the reason they ended up doing that because they had kind of some kind of MacBook connectivity in the back seats, or I don't know exactly what it was now, but there was a reason that they did it that way. Obviously, there was a ton of editing that happened afterwards and all of that, but the actual footage was shot on an iPhone. I'll dig out a link and get that shared as well, because it's a cool advert, really cool advert.
Yeah, I think the question is always purely from a professional point of view. If you're talking about post production, is how much flexibility you have in the files to make adjustments. One of the biggest differences that I see all the time. Even when you can shoot RAW on iPhones, for example, so you can shoot in RAW format. For those listeners who are not really aware of what the difference is between RAW and JPEG. JPEG is essentially a compressed file, and RAW is a much bigger file that allows you to get a lot more detail out of the shadows in particular. So it's a much larger file. The camera captures a lot more information, and then when you're in post-production, you have a lot more flexibility when you edit the photos. So for example, what I mean by detail in the shadows, if you look at a photograph and it seems very dark in certain areas, you can basically bump the shadows up, and you can bring out a lot more detail, which at first appear to have been lost. And you'll notice that there's a lot more detail there. So when you're working on a photograph in post, you can get those details back. Whereas in a JPEG, for example, that's not really possible, or it's possible to a very limited degree. Mm-hmm. So, but a RAW file isn't a RAW file. So not all RAW files are created equal, as they say. So when I shoot RAW on a drone, for example, or on an iPhone, then although I have some degree of flexibility afterwards in post, it's by no means comparable to a DSLR or a mirrorless camera. So as an example, I use a Nikon D750 a lot for a lot of different jobs, and I use it because of a really excellent low light performance. And I know that I can get a lot of detail out of the shadow areas of the image in post-production, which makes it so useful for concert photography, for example, where a lot of stuff happens and, a lot of the lighting conditions are not necessarily always great. So that's really the major difference. So it'd be interesting to see how those smartphones hold up when it comes to the files and how usable they're actually going to be.
This actually leads me on to another thing that I read about earlier this week. And full disclaimer right now, I don't watch this program at all. I usually can't stand this kind of thing, but the story caught my attention. And it's because, being a musician like yourself, I'm interested how they go about these things. And that is, American Idol have not wanted to stop filming and doing their show while we're going through the pandemic, and for really good reasons. They know more people are at home, more people want to watch TV, and so they don't want to turn their show off if they can help it, and not just put reruns on or whatever. So they're continuing the competition. And so what they've done is they've sent 4 iPhone 11 Pros to each of the contestants and the judges. They have sent them tripods, and they have sent them a ring light as well. And so what they've done, they've given them guidance on how to set up, and they are filming themselves perform. Then I assume that those files are then transferred to the judges. They watch that back and film themselves with their reaction and what they would normally do on the show. And so the production team are actually in their own homes right now as well, on the phone, I guess another iPhone 11, calling the contestants and talking them through the angles that they need to get, how they need to set up to get the absolute best footage for it. What a great way to go about it. I haven't yet seen the footage. I've seen some photos of the setups, but not the footage itself. So they're filming in 4K 60. I think the iPhone 11 Pros do. But what a great way. What a great way to go about it. What an ingenious approach. And for a show like that, relatively low cost. Don't get me wrong, these phones are very, very expensive. But for a show like that, that's nothing for them. For the audio, they haven't got into any detail about how they're actually doing that. My assumption is that because they're using microphones, my assumption is that they're using something like IK Multimedia's iRig to record the audio directly into an iPhone. Perhaps they've also sent them an external audio recorder to do it that way and just haven't mentioned it. I don't know, but they're doing it some way like that to get reasonable or hopefully decent quality audio for it. But yeah, they just thought I'd mention that one now as we were talking about phone filming and whatnot.
So that's interesting to think, though, that that's all happening on smartphones now, because, whatever happened to GoPro?
I don't talk about GoPro.
It's still wondering.
I very much dislike my GoPro. they again, and this DSLRs have their place for what they do well. Phones are going to have their place for what they do well, and GoPro absolutely has their place for what they do well. I think we all know what they don't do very well, and that's film anything else that's not in broad daylight. It's just no good. The footage is horrible. I haven't used anything past the Hero 5, so I'm sure it's a lot better these days, but I've not really looked at them.
But GoPro, if you're listening and you want to send us a Hero 7 to review, we are totally up for
Absolutely.
that. No doubt. So this ties in nicely with the other thing that's caught my eye this week, and that's the fact that DJI has brought out the Mavic Air 2. So I'm interested in that naturally because I love flying drones, just as a hobby, of course, but I've been a DJI user for several years now, and I love the technology. I love the way these drones fly, and I've actually been really surprised with the video quality and the photo quality that I've been able to get out of the Mavic Air, which is the drone model that I've flown so far. So Nick, do you fly drones at all?
I haven't. No, I never have flown one. But a couple of episodes ago, you mentioned a story actually about a guy taking drone footage and drone photos. And since that point, it's just intrigued me even more. And I'd like to get out and be able to fly one. So you've got the first version, right? So what's the difference between the first one and the second, sort of the Mark II, if you like, that they've released?
Well, so that's really the thing that's caught my eye, because you'd expect sort of incremental improvements. The Mavic Air has a 12 megapixel camera, for example, and you would expect them to bump that up maybe to a 20 megapixel, 24 megapixel. That would have been great. 48
in a drone.
48 megapixels is the new model. That's incredible. I mean, that's like what happened there?
Wow.
Yeah. So the improvements are not incremental at all. They're massive. It's a completely new drone. It's slightly bigger than the previous model, but really only slightly. It's not. I don't think it's that much. It's and I've got the Mavic here. If you think about that, that's the full extended drone. That's not very big at all. That really, if you wear a hoodie, that drone, if it's folded up, that fits into your hoodie pocket. So that's really that's a very small form factor for a drone with those capabilities. But the Air 2 is a touch bigger, but what you get for that is worth it. Absolutely worth it. So the camera has been upgraded massively. But the other thing that I found really interesting is the fact that the flight time has been increased. So the battery power has been increased. Whilst previously with the Mavic Air, you could keep that drone in the air for about 21 minutes or something like that was the flight time per battery. They've bumped it up to 34 minutes now.
Okay.
So 34 minutes, that's a seriously decent amount of flight time per battery.
Yeah.
Having said that, these batteries are expensive. They come in at about, I think, roughly about £100 per battery. A lot of money for a battery.
That's not cheap.
Yeah, I mean, and you need several batteries. So usually when I take my drone out, I'll take about 3 batteries out or something. Fly for about an hour, in an area close by where I live. There's some moors and it's legal to fly there. So that's very important. When you fly drones, is to make sure you stay legal. We'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, so if you can find an area that allows you to fly these things, it's really, really great fun. And you get some really interesting photographs that way, like landscape type photographs.
Yeah. So is there enough of an upgrade here for you to consider selling your current drone and purchasing the new one?
Yeah, I've definitely thought about it.
Really?
Yeah,
Excellent.
I've definitely thought about it. It's a completely different drone. We talked about this previously, actually in conjunction with the new iPhones, and my iPhone is about 2 years old, and my contract came to an end, and I was thinking about upgrading. And when I looked at the most recent, I don't know what it is, iPhone 12 or something, it just wasn't enough of an upgrade to warrant me spending more money on it. It just wasn't, like, I didn't feel like it was worth the money, and so I decided not to upgrade this time and to wait, maybe for the next generation of iPhones. And I think I'm just gonna hang tight with my trusty iPhone 10, and wait and see whether the next generation is worth the extra spend. But with this drone, with the Mavic Air 2, oh man, it really, really, really looks very, very good. And from what I've seen so far, so Mavic Air 2 footage that I've seen on YouTube, for example, it does really look good. It has 2 different color profiles as well. So from a video perspective, it's really very, very interesting. The gimbal is pretty much the same, and I have to say that the gimbal performance on the Mavic Air, I've really enjoyed that. I mean, it's funny this, because even if you just turn the camera on, you start recording, you don't, even without even flying the drone, if you just walk along with it, it's a great steady cam. I mean, it's like no need to spend 800 quid on a gimbal. If you have a drone already,
yeah,
that'll do it.
Nice. What are they pricing this at?
I think that will come in the UK probably around about the £800 mark.
Okay.
So yeah, it's really not that far off from what the original Mavic Air was when I bought it. When I bought mine maybe 2 years ago.
Okay.
Something like that. I think there's been an improvement on the sensors as well, because what the Mavic Air does is it has some sort of anti-collision sensors. So if you're heading straight for, I don't know, a lamppost or a tree or something, it'll sense that object and it will literally fly around it. And it has sensors on the front and the back. And I think the Mavic Pro now has improvement on those sensors, which is really very good. To be honest, flying these type of drones is not very hard at all. A lot of the flying is actually done automatically. You've got these anti-collision sensors that makes it fairly safe to fly. They take off and land themselves automatically. You literally just have to press a button and the thing takes off. You don't have to really worry about that very much. It has a come home button. So if you run into trouble, you just click a button and the thing just returns home to the exact GPS location that it took off from.
Wow.
I've run into trouble a couple of times in like slightly windy conditions, and not too long ago, I lost all video connection with it because there were obviously probably obstacles in the way, and it was windy, and maybe I was flying a little far. You just press one button, the thing just comes back to you. That's great. And from a video perspective, there are a number of really cool follow modes. So you can set it to track you. So the tracking on it is very good. And it can track you whilst you're walking, for example, or you're cycling or riding a skateboard or something like that. You can just set it up so that it tracks you. And if you take the tracking functionality in combination with a gimbal, with a really well functioning 3-axis gimbal and 4K video, you've got a seriously cool steady cam on your hands there. And especially for moving objects, like if you're if you're running or on your bike or something, you can do some really cool things with that. It can basically track you. It can track you from the side. There's certain modes where it can circle around you. So if you're running or you're cycling, you have like a helicopter shot circling around you, always tracking you in the center of the frame.
Wow.
It's very, very, very impressive what that technology can do.
Oh, man.
And since the quality in with the Mavic Air 2 is so much better, and it's a really very, very impressive update on the old Mavic Air.
Tell you what, you may have convinced me to go buy one. Do you work for them? I forget.
I know, but again, if DJI want to send us a Mavic Air 2 to review, then
two of them, please. Too.
More than happy to oblige. But it's interesting. I mean, the thing about flying drones, we talked a couple of episodes ago about this Lithuanian photographer who uses his drone to create really interesting, funny photographs in lockdown. And so, just as a quick recap, so what he did was he basically took photographs of people through their windows. And we talked about this last time. This may sound weird, but it was all this was all arranged. This was all done with full permission, and the people that he photographed dressed up for it, and some fancy dress and did some funny poses and stuff. And the end result were really, really interesting photographs. And I think there's a link on our Facebook page as well if you want to have a look at that.
So I'm guessing that if that's okay to be done in Lithuania, how would that sit in the UK? Are the laws different here than they are in other countries?
Yeah, the thing about drone laws is that they do differ a lot in different countries. So it's it's potentially very, very different. And I'm not really 100% up on what the laws are exactly in Lithuania. But in order to fly a drone in the UK, you have to actually register. So you have to register the drone, and you have to register as a pilot, and you have to do a little test that basically proves that you are fully aware of what the drone laws are in the UK. So, and that's really true for any drone that weighs more than 250 grams. So anything like the Mavic Air or the Mavic Air 2, they really fall into that category. Any drone that's heavier than 250 grams must be registered with the CAA, so the Civil Aviation Authority, and you have to do like a little pilot test for that. And that's really for just a normal operation of a drone. So for recreational use and so on. When it comes to commercial use of a drone, so if you do commercial photo shoots or anything that results in you making any form of money from a photo shoot, that's really classed as a commercial sort of shoot, and that actually includes YouTube videos as well, because you could potentially you could monetize the video and make money from that. So so for that you need to have a commercial drone license, and that's much more expensive. So I think just a standard recreational license costs something like, I don't know, £7 a year or something. So it's not expensive at all. But it means that you have to take a little test, and you have to you have to get your pilot's license, as it were. which, by the way, you have to carry with you when you fly a drone. So, it's one of these things. There's two things in the UK. You have to have an operator license, which has to be displayed on the drone itself. And I'm guessing, that's in case a drone falls out of the sky or something, ends up in somebody's backyard. Right. And that way they can trace who the owner of the drone is, which I think makes perfect sense. And that's absolutely fine. And the other thing is you have to have a pilot's license, because the person owning the drone and the person flying the drone may potentially be two different people.
Okay. Yeah.
Does that make sense? So, so for me, since I own a drone and I also fly the drone at the same time, I have to have both. I have to have the operator license and the pilot's license for it.
So when we're at this situation, let's say I came to you and we went out to fly the drone. I actually couldn't fly your drone then. Is that what we're saying?
No. Yes, correct. So you wouldn't be able to operate the drone without a pilot's license. Although having said that, it's really easy for you to, you can simply sign up for a pilot's license without actually owning a drone.
Okay, gotcha.
So that wouldn't be, and it would cost you something I think it's somewhere in the region of about £7 or something. So it's not, it's not the end of the world. It basically means that you have to be aware of the rules and regulations of the drone law in the UK. But again, it's really not very difficult or draconian or anything in any way, shape, or form. Just to give you, a few examples, like there's a maximum altitude for drones. So which is 400 feet. And that's because you don't want your drone to interfere with air traffic. So you got to keep your drone under 400 feet. And that's about 120 meters roughly. And that's pretty high. I mean, I don't really see that you would have to go beyond that for any reason anyway, unless it's sort of a commercial operation and you're doing drone photography of the Shard in London or something like that. But generally speaking, 400 feet is plenty. And in terms of like the horizontal distance, that cannot go beyond 500 meters.
Okay.
So a lot of those drones have much more of a reach. So theoretically, they could fly a lot further away from you, but that's the regulation in the UK. It's 500 meters from you horizontally. And of course, you got to ensure that your drone is always in sight, because you have to be able to, remain in control of the aircraft. So you've got to be able to see your drone. So that means if the weather is such that you don't have that you can't see for that distance, then you won't be able to fly that drone that far. So the other things to watch out for is just the distance between the drone and other people, vehicles, buildings, and congested areas. So as an example, so you got to keep your drone at least 50 meters away from people or cars or something like that. So if you're close to a road or a motorway or something like that, you have to keep that 50-meter distance. And you got to stay away from buildings as well. And that actually increases to 150 meters if it's a really congested area. So if you're like near a large group of people, like at a concert, for example, or a sporting event or something like that, you got to keep 150 meters distance from those. And of course, again, you want to how do they do these drone shots, where they fly over crowds and everything at concerts? Well, it's because as a commercial drone pilot, there are different, there's a difference there. So if you're a commercial drone pilot, then you've got to register your flight paths with the CAA, and there's a lot more leeway that you have as a commercial drone pilot, but you have to have a commercial pilot's license, and again, that's really costly. That's in the region of probably about like £1,000 or something.
You might consider some of those rules and regulations as restrictive, but they don't sound all that restrictive to me, considering what you're going to be doing with it. it sounds pretty flexible, actually, from my perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds safe. You know, that's the thing. You also, obviously, you got to stay away from airports. All of this is common sense, to be honest. I mean, clearly, you don't want to fly your drone in the flight path of an airplane. I mean, why would anybody want to do that in their right mind? That's just insane. So all of these things are really there to protect the general public, you know, from any potential accidents that could happen with your drone. And, you know, I don't think it's limiting at all. I have a lot of fun flying my drone. I don't fly it in the middle of the city, obviously. But, you know, if you look around, there are areas where you can safely fly your drone. So, you know, that's just, those are just a few. I mean, you know, this is by no means exhaustive. So, you know, there are more rules to follow when it comes to flying drones, but in principle, you know, we've covered some of the most important ones. But, you know, it's one of these things. I think drones often get a bad press, especially when you hear of incidents like, you know, the Heathrow or Gatwick incident where some nutcase, you know, flew a drone like over the airport. You know, that's not normal behavior. I mean, the vast majority of recreational drone pilots would never think of even going close to an airport. It's like, you know, that's nonsense. It's just that potentially the dangers are there. So that's why that regulation has come into place. And and I think, you know, if you're thinking about flying a drone, then just know how to do it safely. So that's it. We've come to the end of this week's episode of the Camera Shake podcast with me, Kersten Nuts, and Nick Kirby. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope to see you again next week. By the way, if you're listening to the audio version of the Camera Shake podcast, then be aware that you can see us in full Technicolor and in all of our glory over on YouTube. And if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel yet, then it'd be awesome if you could do that. Throw us a solid subscribe. We are working hard to gain 100 subscribers. That's our big goal at the moment. So without further ado, I hope you had fun, and we'll see you again next week.